So, I watched the Revenge of the Sith re-release in theaters. This is a relevant tangent, I swear. You know what I thought the whole time I was sitting there in the theater? Man, this movie is so much worse than I remembered it. I lived through this. I remember playing Star Wars stuff with every friend and family member I had in the years immediately after this. I had no clue how terribly written this actually is.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
At the same time, I was also a kid who was a Mets fan. I watched a lot of Mets games growing up. Like, a lot. They're formative experiences. I probably caught at least a little bit of 80 to 90% of Zack Wheeler's games as a New York Met. I was conscious, sentient, and understood baseball the whole time. And in going back to research for this video, Zack Wheeler was so much better as a Met than I remembered him to be. Wheeler came up as a top pitching prospect for the Mets in the summer of 2013, and right from the start, he was getting the job done. It wasn't super dominant. He was still finding his stuff and was getting lucky on his run prevention, but he was still going out there and giving above average results in a 100 inning sample as a rookie. For a top prospect coming up and actually giving above average results in his first taste of action, I don't recall this getting Wheeler much attention after the fact. Matt Harvey was the star of the show around this time, and after Harvey went down with injury and missed all of 2014, Wheeler still entered that season below Action Bronson lyric getter Dylan G and Big Sexy in the Mets rotation. By the end of the season, he gave the Mets the performance I'm sure they were hoping for. Some other fella named DeGrum or something like that never amounted to anything, and he became the new young stud everyone was talking about instead, though. It's amazing to see a 3.54 ERA over 185 innings amount to slightly below average and replacement level production in 2014, considering those rate and counting stats are exactly the kind of things people were focusing on in 2014. Even better that he struck out more than one batter per inning over that kind of volume. He did technically get lucky in his run prevention again, but by the literal minimum amount possible, so I'll smack you in the mouth if you mention it. But Wheeler's career is off to an encouraging start, pitching for some pretty forgettable Mets teams. Through 2 years, he's shown he has good strikeout stuff and can throw at a significant workload. But maybe the workload came a little too early for him in hindsight, because his innings pitched total for 2015 would be 0, thanks to injury. And in 2016, also 0, also thanks to injury. Reports said that Wheeler had a torn tendon in his pitching elbow during that 2014 season. So yeah, go figure, he had done some of that performance while hurt. About halfway through spring training of 2015, the Mets announced that Wheeler would undergo Tommy John surgery and miss the entire season. Speaking from my memory of the events here, this was the first time Mets fans actually started to treat Wheeler like he was seriously valued on the roster, because the immediate buzz to losing Wheeler for the year was taken very seriously, like the team had taken a noticeable loss. However, you never would have known that based on how the year progressed for the Mets. The 2015 Mets shocked the world by making it all the way to the World Series, on the strength of their fantastic young pitching stepping up in Wheeler's place. Plenty of Mets fans, myself included, were treated to wonderful Mets postseason baseball in the stands that year. You know who else had to watch the postseason baseball from the stands? Zack Wheeler.
Wow, that was disrespectful.
Unbelievably, the Mets would not let Zack Wheeler be with the team in an official capacity while he was actively a member of that team during their postseason run. You know, typically the players, even when they're hurt, can be found in the dugout, not the upper deck in the left field bleachers. They told him that if he wanted to be there for those games, he had to buy tickets. I have never even heard of anything else like this in any sport. Forcing one of your injured players to go sit with Joe from Queens in the stands of postseason games. Reasonably, Wheeler was extremely unwilling to do that. He watched the Mets cap off a pennant run from his couch at his home in Atlanta, Georgia. You know what makes this even worse is twice that summer in 2015, the Mets had Zack Wheeler's names in trade talks, and Zack Wheeler called them and was like, no, I want to stay, pleading with them to still be a Met, and they still did this to him. Truly a bizarre level of disrespect I'm not even sure a Little League team would pull. but that's the pre-Steve Cohen New York Mets for you. Wheeler already was going to have a stretched out rehab that would, best case scenario, keep him out of most of 2016 anyway. But multiple setbacks during the season, including needing surgery on the same elbow because they needed to take out an undissolved stitch, cost him the entire year. When Wheeler finally came back in April of 2017, it had been more than 2.5 calendar years between pitches on a big league mound for him, which should make a whole lot more sense that 2017 was, and easily still is, the worst year of Wheeler's career. Wheeler had elite extension off the mound, and above average fastball velocity and ground ball rate. He was bad at everything else. Run prevention was terrible, his command was weakened, his effectiveness as a pitcher was just a shell of its former self already. And that's normal. It takes a lot to get back in the swing for a big league pitcher being off the shelf that long. It's why threatening Lance McCullers' family after he came back from a long rehab process makes you an extreme innate loser. Do not do this. On top of that, Wheeler was still dealing with nagging physical ailments all year. In a way, you could never really know what you would get anymore in the wake of a season like that. I remember my 17-year-old Mets fan brain almost kinda thought, this isn't gonna work, he should be somebody else's problem. But I was 17 years old, and stupid. The New York Mets are a Major League Baseball team who kinda sorta felt similarly, but only as a half measure. We know now that it is ridiculous to have ever doubted Wheeler's ability, making it a whole lot funnier to point out that the Mets wanted to send him to the bullpen to accommodate the signing of Jason Vargas.
Oh my god.
And then on top of that, demote him to the minor leagues again. Vargas missed the start of the season with injury, causing the Mets brass to have to crawl back to Wheeler and ask him to be one of their starting pitchers again. After tipping their hand that they didn't really believe in him, Wheeler responded by having a fantastic year. The easiest place to start here is showing you visually how much better he got. I'll just make sure you know that red is good and blue is bad. Yeah, the numbers were all very good. Finally a glimpse into the Zack Wheeler that was always meant to be. Ever so quietly, he was one of the very best pitchers in baseball down the stretch that season. You would think he'd taper off due to not hitting a workload like this in 4 calendar years. And the Mets did mercy kill his season a couple weeks in advance just so he could rest up for the following season since they weren't making the playoffs anyway. But no, a very successful year for Zack. Never mind that it opened with him being told to his face that he wasn't good enough, no idea what you're talking about there. I'd categorize Wheeler's 2019 as good, not great. The innings hit a new career high, and to be above average for nearly 200 innings is extremely valuable in modern MLB. His advanced metrics were strong, stronger than his ERA and FIP would probably lead you to believe. But this marked a really big turning point in our story. We are now deep enough into Wheeler's career where his contract with the Mets expires, and he can hit the open market. Who's gonna pay Zack for his services for the next few years to see if he can build off the success that's already been had? Maybe the Mets. They've expressed some public interest in him. Maybe the Chicago White Sox, who are aggressively interested in him and seem to be willing to pay the highest price. No. The Mets' bitter division rival, Philadelphia Phillies. The Mets and the Phillies have basically been at each other's throats since forever. This was not going to go over well for Mets fans, until they saw the dollar figure Wheeler earned from them. 5 years, $118 million, a tick under $24 million per year. At the time, Mets fans were like, whoa, you paid that much for him? Wheeler says the Mets never even approached him while he was available to sign with any team, but hold on, it gets even worse here. We were interested in bringing him back, and we communicated that. Not at that level of contract, said Brodie Van Wagenen, the Mets' general manager in charge of overseeing the team's roster at this time. More than anything else, I'm thrilled with the pitching staff we have, he added, before taking a second to praise the Mets' ability to work with their pitchers. Our health and performance department, our coaches all contributed and helped him parlay 2 good half seasons over the last 5 years into $118 million.
That'll do it. Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, I'd say that'll do it.
Brody. Man, I am actually at a total loss for how many different ways the Mets found to insult Zack Wheeler during this 5 or so year span. Milton was happier at Initech than Zack Wheeler was to be a Met. And for good reason. Be mindful of what Milton did to Initech, by the way. Wheeler managed to get a jab in out the door of his own, saying that when the Phillies officially made the offer to poach him, the Mets were crickets. Because it's them. It's how they roll. And in hindsight, the Mets fan base is justifiably ripping them a new one for this.
Yes, the one that got away. The very unfortunate story regarding Zack Wheeler that still pains me all these years later as a Mets fan. And it's as simple as this, everybody. As Zack Wheeler concludes his 2019 season with the New York Metropolitans, and mind you, at the time of ending that season, Zack Wheeler was coming off of a really strong year when you're looking at the innings pitched. This was back-to-back seasons for Zack Wheeler where he pitched just under 200 innings, something that in today's game is really hard to come by all these years later. Zack Wheeler finally, after dealing with endless ailment in the early goings of his career, found himself with back-to-back rock-solid seasons with the Mets. But it just doesn't start there. Zack Wheeler circled back to the New York Metropolitans after the 2019 season, trying to negotiate a long-term deal, and Brodie Van Wagenen and ownership had no interest whatsoever. And Wheeler is famously quoted saying himself, really not surprising, that's typically what they do, that's how they operate, if you will. I understand the medical staff factored into him, obviously trying to ramp up, but also was derailed in the 2015 and 2016 season. The same Mets medical staff that was famously one of the worst and far none the most horrendous in all the National League, if not Major League Baseball, by having the most idiotic injuries year after year after year and making no proper adjustments to do anything about them. The same Brodie Van Wagenen, who had less of a track record on his resume than a rookie entering the 2020 shortened season, had the nerve to go out of his way to pretty much throw shade at Zack Wheeler for doing that. Wheeler kind of just smirked and had his simple reply, "That is beyond frustrating. It still haunts me this day." And Zack Wheeler, all I can say is, I still miss you.
Here's a list of every pitcher since 2020 with 25 wins above replacement that's 40% above average at run prevention. Okay. Here's a list of every pitcher since 2020 with that 140 ERA plus in at least 750 innings. Yeah, Zack Wheeler, the Philadelphia Philly, is really good. There is no pitcher in the last 3 calendar years that's gone 200 innings with a better ERA than Zack Wheeler. He also has the lowest qualified batting average against of any pitcher since 2020, on top of the second lowest qualified on base percentage against and slugging percentage against of anyone in this span. He's second in MLB in innings since leaving the Mets, 4th in strikeouts too. Thus far, since getting to blossom into a star for a division rival, his accomplishments are just outstanding. Just please start giving the guy more consideration for a Cy Young award. He tends to get better as the season goes along, which should make it totally not a shocker that Zack Wheeler has a phenomenal playoff pedigree as well. Guess which team his best playoff start ever came against?
Franchise he started his big league career with.
This kept up a very strong tendency that's also been there since Zack Wheeler left the Mets. Zack Wheeler is pretty good against the Mets. There may not be a better big game pitcher in baseball right now than this man. Funny how he only got this uniform off 2 good half seasons, huh, Mets? Put it this way. He's been so good in Philadelphia that they gave him a shorter term extension worth even more money than the supposed overpay it took to get him in Philly in the first place. No one, I mean no one, is out here arguing that Zack Wheeler is overpaid these days. You could later find Zack Wheeler on the Phillies' starting World Series games, not being told to sit in the stands if he wanted to be at the World Series because, you know, Zack Wheeler is way too important to be exiled from a team. We've already established that Wheeler was effective as a Met, but he is just blowing that performance totally out of the water. OPS against is way better, strikeout rate is way higher, walk rate is way lower. He's now in his age 35 season and shows no signs of slowing down. In year 2 as a Philly, he led MLB in innings pitched and pitcher WAR. In year 5, he had the lowest rate of hits allowed per inning among qualified pitchers. His most recent season with the Mets saw his strikeout rate as 58th percentile in MLB, only about 8% above average. Today, his strikeout rate is 93rd percentile. His best trait right now is the run value of his off-speed pitches, which, as of today, is in the 99th percentile of all 2025 MLB pitchers. His last season with the Mets, only about 51st percentile. Wheeler with the Mets threw a lot of fastballs. Wheeler with the Phillies still throws a lot of fastballs, but he has an extremely deep mix of pitches that all have distinct shapes and velocities. What they all have in common, though, is looking like fastballs out of his hand. While he's actually lost some velo and break on his fastball since leaving the Mets, he gets way more swing and miss on it now thanks to its role in his arsenal. He's one of the only pitchers in baseball who manages to get chases on a sinker. He also has a splitter and a sweeper in his repertoire too. Both pitches that have very late change in direction, meaning out of his hand, they also look like fastballs to the batter. It's all about taking what's worked for him his entire career and creating a strategy that plays off that. Couple that with some minor tweaks to his arm slot, somehow improving his already elite extension off the mound, and mastery of his repeatable delivery that's about as beautiful as Sabrina Carpenter. Sabrina, please DM me if you see this. And you've turned Mets Zack Wheeler into an absolute machine of a pitcher for the Phillies. In a way, sticking it to the Mets even more so that this was in there all along behind some ever so slight adjustments. If you're wondering why I'm not doing the year-by-year type breakdowns with the Phillies seasons like I did with the Mets seasons, it's because I don't think they're really as necessary here. Zack Wheeler has just been consistently very good year in and year out. There's only so many new ways you can just say, he's good. He finds new ways to do it. Even adding on award-winning defense on top of just being extremely good for an extremely dependable workload. The improvement of his game since leaving the Mets has been staggering. And you have to know that makes Zack feel all the more sweet whenever he sees them again. Zack is a pretty quiet, laid-back guy. I don't know how much more he'll ever say about his relationship with the Mets publicly, but I'm pretty confident his transformation is really, really satisfying to him. And he's become dominant in ways the Mets could have never imagined, even if it was right under their noses the whole time.
That's New York, baby. I love the Mets.